A new year to delve deeper into the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and also this thing we call Unitarian Universalism. So many of you know I'm currently in seminary, my second year actually. And in seminary, they often say that the most basic religious questions can be summarized as, who is God, who are we, and what are we to do? Now, by who is God, depending on our theology, we can understand that question to mean, what is the ultimate nature of reality? What is of ultimate importance? What do we understand as sacred and enduring? The question, who are we, asks, what does it mean to be human? How do we understand and encounter ourselves and one another? And what are we to do means, what is the good life? How do we understand the meaning and purpose of our life, and on what should we set our hearts? Last week we described Unitarian Universalism as a religion that doesn't give us a series of final answers to these questions, but rather gives us a framework to explore them together with freedom and openness, but also with commitment and purpose. Our worship theme for the month of September is identity. We're going to start off the year focused on that second question, who are we? Who are we as individuals, and who are we as a religious community, and who are we as a religious tradition? Now, this is something I planned with Suzanne, our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, back in June. And then last month, in a nice bit of synchronicity, I ran into an exercise during one of my seminary classes that speaks to this question of identity, of who are we? So before we get into the sermon, I have a little paperwork for you to do. That's fun, right? Everyone loves filling out forms. So you should have gotten a slip of paper when you came in today with your bulletin that says identity exercise, and hopefully you got a pen or a pencil. And let me explain this before you get going. At the top, the paper lists some basic categories of identity, like race, class, and so on. Sex is the sex you were assigned at birth, probably male or female. Gender is how you understand your own gender, which could be the same as sex or different, could be non-binary, could be gender fluid, or however you identify. Class is socioeconomic class. Ability means whether you identify as 100% able-bodied or have something that you could consider a disability. You decide what that means. And then there are boxes marked other, in which you can put what other way you might identify, as a parent, a daughter, a lawyer, middle-aged, whatever it is. Write in as many as you like. This exercise is solely for your benefit. You do not have to share it with anyone. We will not be collecting them. Please do not write anything down you don't want to write down. Please don't out yourself in a way that you are not comfortable with. Below this, there's a space to write 3 core commitments you have, whatever these might be. So it might be, for example, my kids, my career, and Civil War reenacting. Or my cats, my amateur theater troupe, and protecting wildlife, right? Doesn't have to be like your top 3 if that's hard to sort out. Just pick 3 meaningful commitments that you consider core to your identity. And then finally, in the circle that's given, divide it up like a pie with a slice for each part of these identities. And the bigger the pie piece, the bigger this aspect figures in your understanding of yourself. So if you super identify as like a man, that's going to be a bigger piece of your pie, whatever it is. So we're not going to spend a super amount of time on this, and it's better not to overthink it. We're going to take about maybe 3 minutes to do this, and then I'll chime the bowl and we'll go on with the sermons. Take about 3 minutes. That may not have been exactly 3 minutes, but I think you're all exceptionally sharp people, so we should be okay. So let's talk about different aspects of identity that we find on this sheet. Some identities in life are given to us and some we choose. Many of the categories that I gave you to fill out on the sheet represented parts of our identity that may seem immutable and unchosen, although they may not in fact be, like race or sex or sexual orientation. These are our identities that we're born into, or at least it may feel that way to us. But then there was that other category, and I'm curious what kinds of things people picked for other. If anyone's comfortable sharing one of their other categories, and only if you're comfortable, maybe you can just say it out loud into the room. What were some others for people? Polyamorous? Veteran? Mother? Grandmother? Wife? Cat mom? Elder, sister? Entrepreneur? Caregiver? Environmentalist? Dreamer? Oh, dreamer. Traveler? Student? Okay, I think we're good there. I think we have a sense of what other might look like. Now there are as many categories as there are people, I'm sure. So there are these parts of our identity that feel immutable and born into. There are parts that are defined by our relationships to other people, and these may or may not change over time. So people, for example, brother, son, father, friend, husband, oldest child, only child. Maybe you're only child for a while and then that changes. Some parts of our identity are based on choices we make as individuals, like what we do. In America, our work or profession is a powerful component of our identity. Military service, often a powerful component of our identity. Voluntary associations like political parties play into our identity. Sports loyalties can be an intense part of our identity. Religious affiliation is kind of a mixed bag as far as chosen versus given goes, because we are often born into a certain religious identity, and maybe later we choose another. And yet we might continue to feel marked by that initial identification. Sometimes we gain a fun new identity in the process of that transition, like heretic, apostate, unbeliever, disloyal child, right? Some identities are assigned to us based on parental or societal or cultural assumptions. It may be assumed when we are born that we are straight until we present evidence otherwise. It may be assumed because we have these secondary sexual characteristics, we must be a certain gender. It may be assumed because we are autistic, we are also disabled. It may be assumed because we are female, we will one day be a mother, and so on. None of these things are necessarily true, but the assumptions about our identity may powerfully shape how we are taught and what we are taught about the world. And this is because all of these identities, the ones we are born into, the ones we are given, the ones we choose for ourselves, they come with powerful cultural assumptions behind them about what it means to have that identity. And since we have not one identity, but many identities overlapping inside of us, these assumptions and the messages they carry with them can be very hard to reconcile. We can end up experiencing, in essence, divided loyalties inside of ourselves, inside of different parts of ourselves. For example, our culture has a million complicated and contradictory messages about what it means to be a woman, and then again about what it means to be a mother, and what it means to be a good mother, what it means to be a feminist, what it means to be a black woman, what it means to be a wife, and what it means to be a professional. Now take all of those shifting, contradictory constellations of cultural expectations, lay them on top of each other, and decide exactly what it means to be a married black woman who is a good mother, a feminist, and a dedicated lawyer. Right? It's just that easy. Now we can say, to heck with all of that, I am just going to be me. I am an individual. And it is true, we are all of us individuals. And yet we all have to contend with these different aspects of our identity and how they shape us. And when we think they are not shaping us, that may be the time they are shaping us most dearly. sometimes unconsciously, sometimes against our own will and our intentions. Now here's where we bring this back to Unitarian Universalism. Our third UU principle is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. That is to say, we are asked to make a serious commitment to lifelong spiritual growth, and this process requires us to look both outward and inward. We learn and grow by encountering the world, but also by encountering our own self. And our third principle at the same time grounds this self-encounter in acceptance. In acceptance. We encounter our own self with honesty and openness, without judgment or guilt or condemnation, but with the same kindness and curiosity that we are asked to extend to others. Now the pie exercise, the circle of identity that you filled out, gives us a place to start self-examination. For those things that loom large in our identity, those big pieces of the pie, we may want to ask, who taught me what it means to be that identity? If maleness is a big piece of my pie, who taught me what it means to be a man? You probably will find you had many teachers, some good, some indifferent, some terrible, and their teachings may have been received as this bewildering and contradictory array of messages. For example, I was born in 1971, so a lot of my ideas about manhood were formed in the late 70s and early 80s. From my dad, I learned that to be a man is to be honest and very hardworking and to stand up for the little guy and to speak your own mind. From one of my childhood teachers, a guy named Sock Sperry, I learned that to be a man is to be gentle, sensitive, deeply concerned about the well-being of others, and to be a feminist and a pacifist. At the movie theater, I learned that to be a man is to kill communists with exploding arrows. I learned that from Rambo. From Eddie Murphy, I learned that to be a man is to be homophobic and make fun of gay people. That comedy routine was everywhere when I was a child. From the gay men that I knew, I learned that to be a man is sometimes to be gay, and that Eddie Murphy is not that funny. And then in a million different ways, I learned that to be a man is to have a good job, a car, a nice house, a well-cared-for lawn, and a barbecue grill. It helps to be good at sports and good with tools. Unfortunately, I am neither of those things. And then on the playground, I learned just an immense amount of truly stupid ideas about what it means to be a man in relationship to girls and women that I won't even get into, except it took me a good 10 years at least to unlearn all of those things in adulthood. I really wish we'd had UU's Our Whole Lives sex education curriculum when I was that age. So for the things that loom large in your identity pie, ask yourself, who taught you what it means to be that thing? Who taught you what it means to be a man, or what it means to be gay, or what it means to be middle-aged? The larger the identity looms in your pie, the more important it is to be clear on what you learned. Might be helpful to compare and discuss this with a partner or a trusted friend. Even write down the lessons that you were taught, as many as you can identify, and ask, how do you feel about these lessons? Because you may find that lessons that you don't even agree with are driving you in different ways. Maybe you learned that to be a good parent is to have a clean and orderly house at all times. I know I did. I don't know where I got that lesson. It wasn't true for me growing up. It's not true for any parents that I know, at least when the kids are little, by which I mean under 20. But maybe you absorbed a similar lesson, and if you did, what a lot of stress and guilt comes from that lesson. So moving on a little bit with this identity exercise, I asked you to name 3 of your core commitments in life. Oh, we've lost our technology here. That's right, we'll come back to it. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to shut this off. Okay, core commitments, 3 core commitments. These are the things that you have set your heart on. So this touches on your most dearly felt understanding of who you are and what matters to you. So here is a potentially illuminating exercise. For the really big pieces of your identity pie, Ask yourself and reflect on, how does this piece of identity inform my core commitments? So for example, let's say a big piece of your identity is being a woman, and one of your core commitments is church. What things were you taught about what it means specifically to be a woman at church? That could be very different things for different people. In some denominations, you would have learned that women are not supposed to speak up and not supposed to lead in church. Now, later on in life at a UU church, this could manifest what you learned in different ways. You might pass up leadership opportunities because women are not supposed to lead at church. Alternately, you might take 1,000,000 leadership positions because you are going to show that women can lead at church, which is great unless you've reached a time in your life when your energies are really needed elsewhere. Maybe you're dealing with aging parents or a child who really needs you or whatever it is, and you actually need to step off the brakes a little at church. There's such a thing as overfunctioning, right? And now this one message is pushing you one direction and your reality of your situation is another. Going in the other direction, look at the pieces of identity that your core commitments might intersect with. Let's say a core commitment right now is caring for my aging parents. What does it mean to me to be a son? What have I been taught about that, and how may that be impacting the way I care for my aging parents? For example, if I have learned the lesson from wherever I learned it that to be a good son is to make my parents happy, then what happens if I have to help them come to grips with a situation about which they are not happy at all? If I have learned that to be a son is to be obedient, what happens if I have to make decisions that they do not agree with? If I have learned that to be a good son is to support my parents in their old age, what am I feeling if the reality is I can't do that as well as I would like because of my own financial circumstances? And if I have learned that to be a good son is always to be successful in my career, what does it mean if what I really need to do is downshift my career so that I can be closer and better able to care for my parents? They're not easy questions. They don't have easy answers. But understanding at least the different psychic forces that may be impinging on us can help us make clear decisions. It can also help us spiritually, because when the internal messages of our identities conflict with each other and with our core commitments, the result can be anxiety or guilt or shame or resentment. But if we identify what's going on and we understand the messages that we're hearing, we may more easily be able to come to a place of peace and offer ourselves grace about this. Okay, I'm going to suggest one more follow-up with your identity worksheet. With regard to your core commitments, the ones you've written down, try this exercise. Imagine that someone has been observing your life for the last 2 days. What would they say were your core commitments based on what they observed? What about if they were watching you for the last week or the last month or the last year? Now, the ups and downs of life are such that our core commitments may not always be reflected in this day or that day, this stretch of time. But if they're not showing up consistently and for long stretches of time in your life, then it may be time to ask, why this discrepancy? We can start by asking, is this still one of my core commitments? Maybe it isn't. And that's fine. Commitments change. But if so, it's good to let our identity catch up to our new commitments so that we are inhabiting the life we actually live with authenticity and clarity. Or it may be that our core commitments have not changed, but we need to put them on hold for a while, and that's fine too. That's life. But it's good to acknowledge that so we're not feeling guilt, so that we're not beating ourselves up over it or making commitments that we can't keep. The question then becomes, how do we keep this commitment alive in our hearts? And again, the goal is to inhabit the life we're actually living with clarity and authenticity. And finally, it could be that we're very clear on what our core commitments are, but we've allowed our choices and priorities to get out of alignment, right? That happens. Maybe we're simply distracted. We didn't realize we were spending that much time playing World of Warcraft to the detriment of our studies. It's a little blast from the past from the last decade. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Today it would be Fortnite. Does anyone know the video game Fortnite? I read an article last night that claimed that 5% of British divorce filings in the last year cited the video game Fortnite. So take that with a grain of salt, but there you have it. Or it could be identity conflict. Suppose one of our stated core commitments is to our family, right? That's a core commitment that I deeply feel to my family. But a big slice of our identity pie is being a man, and another big slice is being a father. And what we learned about being a man is that a man has a successful career. And what we learned about being a father is that a father provides for the family. So what would our hypothetical observer make of the fact that our stated core commitment is to our family, and yet we haven't spent more than a handful of waking hours with our wife and children in the last 3 weeks because we're at the office? And most importantly, what do we make of this fact? Because it is true that as these lessons have taught us, we are absolutely committed to our family, and we are expressing that fact as we have been taught to. But is that really how we want to express our commitment to our family? And is it working for us? And is it working for our family? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here, but the point is to inhabit our own lives with authenticity and clarity in a way that reflects our true deep values. Now, of all the messages that we have learned around the pieces of our identity, the ones that are most powerful and potentially most pernicious are the ones that define our worthiness. We may have learned lessons, in fact, we almost certainly learned lessons about what children have to do to be worthy of love and respect, or who on the socioeconomic ladder is worthy of love and respect, or what a marriage has to look like for a wife to be worthy of love and respect, or how a life lived has to look for an elderly person to be worthy of love and respect. Right? We feel that deeply. So ask that question about the pieces of your identity that loom large. What was I taught that makes this kind of person, this identity, worthy? Because the good news of Unitarian Universalism is that we are all worthy of love and respect. Right? We have inherent worth and dignity, not in some future day or future year when we have satisfied all of these lessons we were taught, all these different conditions that have been planted in our heads, but right now we have inherent worth and dignity. Right now we're worthy of love. You are worthy of love. And the beautiful follow-through to this message, and this is one that I believe with all of my heart, and it is at the core of our faith. Right now, we can also be that love for one another and for the world, just as we are. Our principles call us to love ourselves, but they also call us to love one another and to love the world deeply and faithfully and honestly and with risk. And we can do those things. Our faith tradition says, right now, you are enough for both of these tasks, loving yourself and loving the world. You're worthy of love. And there is a love inside of you that the world is waiting for, that the world needs, and it is yours to give just as you are. So as the poet said, don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it into this space. And your joy and your passion, all the power of those identities. And bring your need to heal, to be healed, and your power to heal. And above all, bring your love. Because the world needs it, and it is yours to give. There is work to be done, and we have all we need to do it here in this room together. Blessed be, and amen.